All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us on this cold December night. My name is Andrew Hannes. I'm the director of the Illuminating Discovery Hub here at the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery, where we do all things science outreach, science engagement, and the fusion of art and science, which is very unique that we get to tie that right into our Crossroads series here tonight. So Crossroads is an idea, a collaboration, really, between the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery, the Morgridge Institute for Research, which is our sister private research institute in this building with us, and the UW-Madison Strategic Communications Office. So it really is designed as an opportunity for us to bring in experts from around campus and around town, and sometimes from outside of town, to come in and talk about the things that they are really interested in, the things that they're passionate about. And that really does differ from each talk to the next. So I encourage you to check ahead. If you're getting our newsletter, you're going to see that there's a variety of talks and dialogues that are coming up that are got to be of some interest to you. If you're here with us tonight, it means that you're interested in some of the unique things that we do. So just so that way I can take a moment to acknowledge this land that we occupy here at the Discovery Building, I want to start off by saying Ha Ni Cha Wira Pi, which is Ho Chunk for it is nice to see you all, and Pina Gigi Wi, thank you for joining us. Colleague of ours upstairs, Laura Red Eagle, is a Ho Chunk member and has given many of these sort of land acknowledgments in her native language, Ho Chunk, and it'll never be as beautiful as what she does it, but I'm trying, and trying to get creative as we go. So the University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies ancestral Ho Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dejope since time immemorial. Dejope translates to four lakes in reference to the Yahara River's four connected lakes. The Ho Chunk have a deep cultural, economic, and spiritual connection to this land and its waterways. UW-Madison respects and recognizes this Ho Chunk land and the other 11 First Nations of Wisconsin and affirms that we are better when we stand together. So, tonight we're here to explore the intersection of art, science, and most notably, science communication. We have a really unique panel of presenters here this evening, and I'm going to start off by giving you just a short insight into who they each are, and they're going to come up, give us some presentations, really give us a deep dive into what it is that they do, why they do it, and afterwards we'll do a quick little moderated panel, and then we're going to open up for questions for the audience. So first and foremost, Professor Nan Li is an associate professor in the Department of Life Sciences Communication here at UW-Madison, which is an affiliate, and she's also an affiliate of the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery, the McPherson I Research Institute, and the Robert F. and Jean E. Holtz Center for Science and Technology Studies. Li's latest research focuses on the intersection of science and art, exploring how AI-generated imagery, indigenous visual storytelling, and other artistic approaches can enhance public engagement with scientific information. Her work is particularly concerned with how nonverbal messaging can bridge divides in public opinion on critical issues like climate change and sustainability. Next, we will have Sonya Sankaran. Sonya, who is an artist, ecologist, and an educator, whom I've had the pleasure to work with on a recent mural installation here in Madison over at State Line Distillery, if you guys need to go for a drink. She is trained as an ecologist and marine scientist and has worked around the world across the U.S., Wisconsin, and facilitating educational projects that fuse ecology and art. Her aim is to bridge culture and heritage in ways that inform and leverage art as a means of building value and knowledge within a community. And last but certainly not least, Casey Fletcher, who is in his final year of the UW-Madison MFA Sculpture program. His work primarily focuses on racial identity and how the community and mass media engage with the topic of racial equity, leading to well-intentioned and counterproductive messaging. Uniquely, he also explores the attention economy and how people receive information that they determine as legitimate or not, and how it influences their collective sense of identity. Also, last year, he was a Kohler Fellow of mine and created a wonderful art exhibit to which you can ask him about later. So after we've heard from all three presenters, like I said, we'll have a quick moderation of a few questions and then do a Q&A. So with that, I would like to welcome up Dr. Nan Li.
All right. It works. Yes, it works. All right, awesome. So thanks, Andrew, so much for the nice introduction, and good evening, everyone. My name is Nan. So like Andrew introduced myself, my work has many years has been focusing on public engagements of sciences, especially how to develop nonverbal effective strategies to engage diverse audiences regarding controversial scientific topics. And as you guys can imagine, communicating science these days can be really challenging, especially thinking about the ways or the most conventional approaches that have been used to talk about scientific issues. For example, a lot of the charts, data visualizations, diagrams, and things like that, those are the established language of science, the established language of scientists who have used those approaches for talking among themselves and to other audiences for a very long time, right? So thinking about COVID-19, for example, a lot of these approaches have been used for talking about the disease and other components. However, when you think about these approaches, those can lack effectiveness. For example, a lot of these charts and visualizations and stuff like that require a very high level of graph literacy and data literacy to understand. And most importantly, a lot of these can be potentially misleading or confusing. A lot of them is done unintentionally, but still it could be problematic. So for example, here I have an example that many of you may have been aware of, the flatten the curve chart, which is really, this iconic symbol that has been used at the beginning of the pandemic to talk about the importance of, mitigation measures, especially at a community level. However, if you look at this example, this first chart, do I have a little pointer here? The first graph there is coming from the CDC's 2007 report on this whole idea of flatten the curve. The original thing is really about a scientific model, how different things can be done at a community level so that, first of all, the peak of the pandemic will be postponed. That's number one. And then number two, the pressure on the medical system will be down, right? So basically you make sure that all of the hospitals are still functioning. And second of all, and last of all, which I think is most important, is you can potentially reduce the number of infected cases. So that's why you can see the size of the curves is actually very different, with the flattened curve having much smaller areas underneath the curve. However, as this piece of information gets translated into mass media, the second chart in the middle is something that Economist, the magazine, published after the pandemic happened. And you can see they try to replicate this idea, right? So they try to explain what's going on and why this is important. But I don't know why, but a very critical piece of information is missing in this rendition. As you can tell, they still talk about delay the peak. They still talk about reduce the pressure on the health system. Oops. How do I go back? Okay. Yes. So they still talk about, those two major things that are happening, but I think they really misrepresent the fact that you can reduce the number of infected cases for the second chart. You can see for this version, the areas underneath the two curves are equivalent, which is something, I don't know if it's done intentionally or unintentionally, but it is there. So the last one, I think, is the one that most of you were aware of and probably had seen during the pandemic, is this chart that Dr. Drew Harris put up on his own Twitter account or X account at that time. So he saw this article on Economist, and as a population health scientist, he thought it would be a really great idea to use this chart to talk about why we need to all wear masks, why we need to all keep social distancing, so that way we can make sure that our hospitals are still functioning. So for that, I think this is a very cool example of, using visuals and charts to talk about this very unique scientific concept that a lot of people would crave for the information about that. So at the time, in August 2020, we collected data from 500 US adults regarding their awareness of this chart, and most importantly, like the Dr. Drew Harris chart, the flattened curve one. So from there, we want to see if people's awareness of the chart is actually significantly related to, for example, their willingness to do social distancing. So we want to see if being aware of this chart actually makes a difference. However, the answer is no. Based on this data analysis, this statistical data analysis, we didn't find any significant relationship between people's awareness of the information and their perceptions of and behavioral intentions towards social distancing measures, which could be because of many reasons. For example, maybe at the time people already were highly concerned about this issue. That's why they don't really report any change in their behavioral intentions. But in my opinion, the fact that this chart is somewhat misleading and doesn't really explain the concept in the most effective and accurate way could potentially contribute to its ineffectiveness as a communication device. And another thing, again, I'm using COVID-19 as an example. I'm sure during the pandemic, you guys have seen a lot of images that portray, for example, the pathogen that causes the viruses, right? So I think this approach of using lab images and a lot of pseudo coloring, a lot of beautiful representations to show science, again, has been conventional. This is something scientists have been doing for decades and decades. And then for this type of approach, usually beauty is prioritized, right? So aesthetics is prioritized. I think on top of that, the most important thing is scientists want to convey a sense of knowing. And that even began from, for example, HIV communication. People use this type of images to show people how much they know. This is what they have observed, and this should be something that everybody knows. However, with this approach, I think something that's really missing from the practices is people usually don't consider how this type of images can impact viewers' emotional responses regarding the subject that is portrayed. So for example, in this study, we studied more than 70 pieces of visual representations of the SARS-CoV-2 viruses. So these images are only a selective set of the images that we're studying, but you can tell those all look very different. Even though everything here is about SARS-CoV-2, they're put together by CDC and NIAID with the goal of telling the public about what viruses look like, but you can see they use different visual patterns, different colors, different shapes. Some of them are simulated images, and others are more like, microscopic images of the viruses themselves. Some of them are artistic illustrations, and you have the CDC spiky ball images there too. So those are very different. However, when you look at these images, the way how people respond to them emotionally is drastically different. So for the ones on the top, I did a pilot study with about 250 people online, and those images evoke the highest levels of disgust and fear among people as compared to other images which have like a more friendly kind of looking and playful colors and simpler patterns and things like that. And most interestingly, what we have found is exposure to the images on the top row, right? So exposure to those images actually end up polarizing people's emotional responses to these to the topic. So for example, thinking about people who are already very concerned about COVID-19 at a time versus people who are not really concerned about it, you can see there is a gap between their fear level, right? So if I'm really concerned about it, I would definitely report a higher fear level. However, that gap was exaggerated among people who have seen the first group of images. So if they see something later, it's fine. Their fear level is not that much different from each other. However, if they see the first group of pictures, they become even more extreme in their existing emotions about the topic. So yeah, and then I think the same polarization effects also applies to other forms of data visualizations or science visualizations. So here, this is a study that's not done by myself, but It's an eye tracking study that tries to understand where people pay attention to when they look at a data charts about climate change data. So all of these charts show the increasing temperatures over the decades. And then they show the pictures to liberals and conservatives in the United States, and they want to see where people pay their attention. So what they have found is for liberals, they pay more attention to the higher ends of the scale, and they pay more attention to the increasing phases of the chart. But for conservatives, they pay attention to the lower ends of the scale, and they pay more attention to the flat phases of the chart. So I think for scientists, it's kind of, discouraging, because for many years, we all know we need to give people data. We need to show them the facts. We need to show them this is how the temperature looks. But guess what? People are still being very selective when they're looking at these evidences, when they choose what to look at, how to interpret it. It's very value-driven, especially for the topics that they already have very strong opinions on what's going on. So for me, I think, understanding all of these limits and challenges regarding the conventional approaches, I want to explore alternative approaches. So that's why I think art, visual art and creativity could be a potential better way for us to engage diverse audiences. And this is something that is published by the White House in early 2022, I believe. Yes, 2022. This is the first time that the government wants art to be part of policy initiatives regarding climate change. So I don't know, maybe some of you know that a national climate assessment, which is really the most robust scientific report and policy recommendations from the nation regarding how should we do and how should we deal with climate change. And in this report, in this call, they say that we really need to combine science and art to move people to greater understanding and action. So there is a big call, big initiative behind all of this. So for me, I want to understand. I want to understand if actually this is a better approach, if this is something that we can do to help inform people, to help make a differences, to encourage people to take actions. So this art piece is created by an artist whose name is Diane Burkle. So he is based off Philadelphia. He's an environmental artist. And for this one, this is a piece of artwork that she created in 2020 regarding climate change. So maybe I can pause a minute and let you guys appraise this and really digest what this piece is all about. So for this one, she kind of combines a lot of the art components, right? So for the paintings, you can see there's a lot of red and orange and blue colors. So those represent the heat waves that happen in Europe. So if you guys pay a little, look a little closer, that is actually Europe map. And then that little area is Italy. And then on top of the painting is melting glaciers. And at the bottom, on the side, clearly there is a scientific data graph there that is Keeling graph. That is very well-known, sort of iconic graph that shows the accumulations of CO2 over the time. So she managed to combine a lot of different things together, the causes, the results, the wildfires that happen in Australia, that is, recreations of a news photo. So she really uses this type of art to tell a story, to encourage people to think what climate change means and why it matters and what kind of real impact that it has caused. So I want to study it. I want to see if exposure to the art is actually more effective than exposure to the data chart in terms of encouraging people to think whether climate change is relevant to themselves or not, especially across different ideological lines. So in this study, again, this is a national population sample, and we want to understand how exposure to the art versus the original data graph. So that is the one on the far right. And in between, so we have, because we don't want to compare apple and oranges, so we have to create two other control conditions where you have the art combining the original graph. So we did a little photographing, so that's why you can see all of the details of the data graph. And then we also did a standalone data graph without any of the contextual information kind of resembling what is originally shown in the art. So that way we can make a more meaningful comparison in terms of whether the artistic components make a difference or whether it's the information about the chart itself makes a difference in terms of people's opinions. And we create these Instagram posts and have like explanations and captions and everything. So in addition of showing this, another thing that I think really matters is the power of using art goes beyond to just show the information. I think the only powerful way that art can be, or one of the only powerful way that art can be used to encourage actions is to make people think. So you need to give people the space and opportunities to think about this issue. So for this study, for the half of the people, they get a chance to look at the visuals alone, to think about them. So we didn't provide any information. We just let them to think, to look at it, to tell us what they see. And then for another group of people, they see the Instagram post, they see all of the information that goes with it. And what we found is for people who are allowed or who are given an opportunity to really reflect on the meanings of these visuals, the opinion gap, the opinion gap between liberal Democrats and conservative Republicans is much narrower when they see the art. So basically, what it means is as compared to the original data graphs, the art, exposure to the art, if you let people think about it, if you give people a chance to reflect on its meaning, it kind of brings people together. So by the end of the day, there is a better chance for them to kind of say that, yes, this issue is relevant to me, only if you give people a chance to think. And if you don't give people that chance, again, exposure to these informations equivalently polarize people's opinions as what we have seen before. So what should we do from there? So, I'm really excited to be part of today's panel because I think this really gives us a lot of new insights and future directions in terms of how can we revamp the way how we do science communication for many years, right? So I think art definitely shows potentials, but I think there are a lot of additional questions that we need to think about. For example, like people always trust the scientists. How do we make them trust artists? So are artists considered credible or trustworthy source when it comes to serious scientific issues, right? So that is one thing. And another thing is when you show these art pieces, I think a lot of the activities or practices just focused on creations and showing the art. But I think in addition to that, we need to think about some scaffolding strategies that we can better use art for public communication. For example, how do we prompt reflections? How can we make sure that art evoked a mixed level of emotions that's positive and negative, so people appraise the pieces, appreciate the beauty, but at the same time, to really make them think about it and really make them take the issue seriously. And who are the audiences that we reach out? So do we require audiences to have some level of art interest or literacy to understand the pieces, right? So not everybody is an art person. How can we make sure like something like this actually reaches out to a lot of people? And I think another thing, my other colleagues today will talk about that more, is how can we make these art creations and communication engagement happen at a community level? So I'm going to talk about one last quick thing. I'm going to stop there. So this is like a newer effort that I started this year, really based off a lot of the empirical insights that I gained over the years from my research. So this is community co-creations of art. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the emerald ash borer crisis, this invasive species that killed millions of black ash trees in Wisconsin and other parts of North America. And it's not just like an environmental hazard. It actually causes a really bad damage on basket weaving within the indigenous tribes in Wisconsin. So we work and partner with the Menominee tribe of Wisconsin, and Sherry is the artist that I work with, so who has been weaving these traditional black ash baskets for decades. However, with the shortage of the materials, she wouldn't be able to continue her cultural practices, which is really disheartening, but at the same time, I feel like this presents a good opportunity
to use art as a way to tell these stories that happen at a community level, to engage the local people, to pay more attention, to be aware of the issues, and more importantly, I think for general public, telling these stories, being aware of what's going on could also have an impact on people's opinions. So this is also some of the ongoing research. All right, so that's it. I hope that gives you a little information about my work, and I look forward to the other conversations. Thank you.
All right. So, oh, I'm already on. Look at that. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Sonya. Oh, that's not me. Wrong button. There we are. So, I'm so glad you all came out. It's really cold out, and it's very windy, and I appreciate this. I just most recently got to know Andrew because of this wonderful project that I was given the opportunity to be a part of here with the WID. But I've been working in art and science for a long, long time. I am a second-generation Indian American. I grew up here in Madison. But I spent a long time away. I lived in California, and I also worked in Costa Rica and in India, and I've always used art as kind of a tool to work in scientific fields. I guess let's see, I wanted to talk today about how art can be used both as a tool and it ends up being this wonderful outcome of sensory observation, which is something that is a foundation of scientific study. I guess, so, I'm still trying, I'm still thinking about Nan and science. I gotta get out of my science brain. So I studied, I was a scientist for so many years, and I'm trying to figure out how to talk about my art in a way that is legitimate. So you're gonna have to excuse me, I'm trying to step outside of my science mind. I guess what I wanted to say is that I've worked as a in conservation education for many, many years. The work that I did in Costa Rica and India, I was working for nonprofits and things like that, and I always found that art was a tool for crossing barriers of communication, crossing barriers in levels of education, things like that. And art always came very naturally to me, so it was kind of like an outreach tool that I utilized without even knowing that I had it in my tool belt. I went on to work at the Monterey Bay Aquarium after getting my master's in marine science, where I co-taught high schoolers field ecology. And then I moved back to Madison. I've been working as a community mural artist. And I started out in MMSD's alternative high schools, but most recently I've been working in Dane County parks and with the WID. And I've always used art as this interpretive tool for nature connection and environmental science. But I also work as a Spanish medical interpreter, and I guess kind of the thread is that I have been using, always put myself in the position of as an interpreter. So I've always had needed a tool to interpret kind of from one language to another. And what I'm realizing is that art is that tool to interpret across these barriers that people have. These are some of the tools I've actually been asked to develop. In my life, wherever I've studied and worked in science and art education, these are the kinds of things I've been asked to develop, really literal translations of the science. So for Curadev, for example, this is a biotech, and I did web design and digital design for them. And as you can see, things like data depiction or photography, that's like up in the top right image, that's a slide of some cells, they're some metastatic cancer cells. Whether it's photographs or illustrating abstract concepts, art is a way to kind of transport that viewer into a concept without having to explain the science in the same kind of way that a textbook would. It's the most natural way to engage the broadest audience if you utilizing colors and shapes to kind of trigger that person's imagination to unify them with their subject. And the result, besides being educational, ends up being really beautiful. And so it casts this broad net for a really broad audience. And it's engaging. And I think that that's kind of the intangible piece that a lot of educators and public outreach folks are trying to hit. They have the information, people have a lot of scientific information, or people have information that they want to convey, but the piece that they're always missing is how do you engage an audience? And surprisingly, art does that very naturally. There's kind of like I'm sure that there's a science behind why colors stimulate the mind, and people have studied that, like people like Nan. But really, it's kind of magical, right? So the way that these kinds of graphs are effective means that various publications and things are starting to actually use art as like a centerpiece for communication. So this is a publication called Current Conservation. I did not design that cover, but I was hired to design an image of this very rare plant that is found in paddy fields in India, and enhances that viewer's experience of that article and takes them to this place that they may never get to visit in the paddy fields of India. And this particular publication, it's a wonderful publication that's for free online. I would really encourage you to look for it. They really highly put the artwork at the same level as the science that they're presenting, because they realize the power of it to kind of transport people to these wonderful places globally, and understand the concepts. And I think, to Nan's point, to really bridge that divide between people's maybe political opinions or stances, and just bring them closer to that topic so that they can think about it clearly and digest that information clearly. This is another project where I was brought on to illustrate an ecosystem and many different species that people would normally have to look in a field guide to learn about. And many people are maybe intimidated to look in a field guide or don't have a field guide. And so this is a space at the Lucier Family Heritage Center, and the goal that they had there was really to create this transportative space so that people could see things up close that they, might not see. It might be a rare animal or a rare plant, but also for them to experience it indoors so that when they go outdoors, they can look for those same species. It's called a native year because we depicted a prairie on the left all the way to a marsh on the right, and it goes from spring to winter plants as how they are blooming throughout the year. So a person can also see that year in one moment as they look at it. So it enhances that, it kind of bridges that barrier of time as well. You can kind of jump through time as you walk through this. So that power of art to be able to again, unify you with that space and that time and that organism is kind of what people are looking to in order to engage their audiences and deepen that learning. And I love this work because the result is really beautiful. It's really fun to make. I learn so much because I'm asked to paint things and do things that I knew nothing about. Some of those first slides with the tumor immune cycle, that's information that I got to learn on such a deep level because of my work as an artist. This is another painting that I created for the Heritage Center, and it's a prairie ecosystem. And again, it was so much fun to make because it's on so many levels. There's a microscopic level and a root system all the way to this grand prairie. And then they overlaid it the way you may see it. The painting is in their building outside their offices, but the way you might see it is either at the Lucier trails at the Heritage Center or Anderson County Park. They have overlaid all of this information on an interpretive panel. And this is what's interesting, is that the way I experience it, or the way that you may experience it when you walk into a prairie, is by seeing all of this beauty. And then because we're so moved, we say, we want to know what's moving me. And so that's why these labels become really meaningful. And I can really relate to that. I relate to wanting to know the name of the bird that sings when I go out there. And that's why this has always been really exciting. But I started to realize over time, as I really love this work, and I would continue to love it, but what about that beauty that is still in the mystery of not knowing? And what do we get from taking a walk in the woods and not knowing the species names? Or maybe coming up with our own name of the species. Or maybe we're listening more deeply to what we're feeling when the bird sings or when the wind goes through, because we're not looking for an answer somewhere. So what does that experience look like, and what does that experience feel like? And I've been starting to more and more also understand that when people walk up to my art, a lot of times they're not necessarily looking for the labels. There was a woman who walked in and saw the Heritage Center, and she said, "Oh my God, those colors make me want to cry." So what is that emotional experience that we're having, and how is that on the same level, maybe just as meaningful as the information that we're getting? And perhaps in some regard, like what Nan was getting to, is maybe it could even be more meaningful in the sense that it could kind of bring us from our different opposite places that we are coming to with our opinions and our ideas and our labels, and maybe bring us to a similar experience that could perhaps allow us to approach some of those ideas from the same perspective, or a more similar perspective. And that's something that I'm getting more and more excited about exploring and understanding. Which is why I stuttered so much getting started, is that I started as a scientist giving this so much importance and really elevating this, and now I'm really trying to understand how to articulate why this other perspective and this other value is possibly quite as important, if not more, to me. So when I was studying as a marine scientist, I got to go diving and being in these environments, and that was really what was most magical and important to me. And I had this choice at that point to become a research scientist and go deeper into that, building this body of scientific literature. And I realized that's not really what I want to do. I really want to live in that mystery probably a little bit longer than most people who are ready to move on and write the paper. But I still love the science because it's super compelling. So I started exploring more about what is it like to just be in that moment and also in that emotion. This was painted last year. I did a series on snow because we didn't get snow here. And it was very hard for me emotionally to be in Wisconsin and not have snow. Of course, I'm very aware of the climate change issue, but not having it was pretty, it was very disturbing. And painting a series on snow and as an ode to that to that change in our world was really important, and felt more satisfying than maybe like forwarding an article about climate change to my friends, forwarding my artwork to my friends and saying, "Hey, this is my ode to snow." They were all like, "We hear you, we feel that," right? So that was pretty important. So what I'm trying to, again, get back at is what's really interesting now, though, is that art, as it's gone through its phases, it started out by, okay, we create our own art. This is an article that someone else goes by The Honest Broker created. And originally, people, after they made their own art and started having access to entertainment, they were like, okay, well, we can consume someone else's art. And little by little, it's turned into distraction. I think we're going to talk about the attention economy a little bit, but as a distraction from maybe being present, we can consume entertainment. But at this point, I feel like a lot of things kind of like parade around as art, and they're deceiving us into thinking that they're art, but really they're meant to addict you in some way and get further and further and further away from our primary, I think, instinctual place of creating art based out of our own primary observations and our first-person experience. So we're always looking to what's that other third-person experience or value or fact or label or whatever. And I'm really trying to pull myself back here and pull people back with me. So this is some work that I've done with kids, which is in order to kind of harness that intangible, moment of being able to be in the present and observe and create. Is creating ephemeral art with young people. So these are nature mandalas with kids that I've created with them, and they get that time to harvest plants and like have that full sensory experience. And as a part of the team of a team of educators that I helped to co-write the Wisconsin Standards for Environmental Literacy, I thought this was a really interesting quote out of that. Environmental literacy and sustainability stem from a person's relationship with their place. Environmental literacy is demonstrated when individuals have the knowledge, skills, and dispositions to engage individually and collectively to support sustainable, natural, and cultural systems. And I feel like we know how to give people knowledge and skills, but the disposition to engage and support sustainable cultural systems, I think these are the intangible pieces that art can actually provide, that book learning cannot provide. And I experience that with kids a lot in environmental education kind of settings. These are ephemeral weavings that we created with spun wool. So I would create the frames beforehand, and then kids would harvest these prairie plants and things. They would touch them and feel them and know them, and you could ask them questions about milkweed or any of these plants afterwards, and they knew the shape and the flower color and everything later. So they were learning, but they were learning in this very different way. Other way. So anyway, I guess my kind of revelation has been that this unbridled observation without needing an answer or some kind of dual judgment is actually the foundation of a scientific mind. It kind of brought me full circle that when you can really take in all that information without filtering it through some kind of scientific lens, I actually become a better observer, and a lot of people become better observers. And this is a mural the mural that we just created with the WID, and this is with my my colleague Richie Morales, and his pieces are these really bright insects. And we talked so much about this kind of crossover between perception and culture, and so many conversations while we made this mural. And I just feel like there was so much interwoven into this experience between regenerative agricultural concepts that we collaborated with scientists here at the WID on, and also this kind of artistic translation of what those really are. And it was a great experience to not have to have a boundary between those two experiences, those two kind of perceptions. Oops, wrong, I don't keep doing that. So this is a picture of the other side of the mural. And it goes from this underground picture of the fish, the fish skeleton. There is an elk skeleton interwoven with a beehive. And actually, Richie created this beautiful woman's face, and then there's a profile of her in the middle, in the blue, and then again over here. So it's kind of this rippling hidden effects in there, which was really fun to create. And it still encompasses a lot of the regenerative agriculture concepts in there. I'm gonna push the wrong button again. Why? There it is. Okay. So thank you very much for listening, and I think thanks so much for understanding my confusion of my topic, but I really appreciate this, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Casey.
Well, thank you all so much for presenting. That was really great. Eager to hop in on it. And thank you all for coming. So that isn't art, right? That is a oil field on fire in Kuwait. But I do think in my own sort of generalized theory of what art is like, it is a bit like this. So it is frequently difficult to contain, but it is overwhelming. It's obviously a really powerful force, but one that's a bit hard to exactly deploy strategically. It's hard to take something like this and put it towards a specific project. But it is nonetheless something that if you're in this helicopter taking this picture, if you're on the ground, if you're somebody trying to put these out, or one of the cows in one of these pastures, this is a undeniably powerful and overwhelming experience. But compare that to something like internal combustion, which is sort of characterized, it's internal, right? It is selectively creating an external zone where contaminants and impurities stay out. And creating an interior space that is defined specifically by rigid boundaries and barriers to entry. And because it's created that, it can work very effectively towards a specific project and a specific objective. It can take those same ingredients from that oil field of fuel, air, and a spark and turn it into something that is productive, we might say. And to me, that is sort of the relationship between art and science. I see them as things that are really, in their constituent parts, essentially the same. Maybe you could think of them as branches off of a tree that share the same root. They are both kind of, in my experience, concerned with developing new ways of seeing, disseminating information or affect or experience to people that are uninitiated in whatever that is, or this illustration that this is a slingshot. I think about slingshots a lot because it's sort of the central MO to my practice is thinking in slingshots. If you've ever used a slingshot or shot a firearm that has iron sights, you use the two external pieces, like the left branch and the right branch, to center your target, and you pull back and hopefully hit the thing that you're looking for. Art and science, to me, are kind of these things, where I consider both the history of art, what contemporary practitioners are doing in art, but I also consider science too. And I mean, I see them all as the same thing, so maybe it's not quite that didactic. But to show you how some of this shows up in my work, like slingshot thinking, if I want to talk about that thing in the middle, which is my ineffable experience of living in a black body, raised by a white family, and my mourning of my feelings of placelessness. I could make work about that exact thing. I could try to go directly to that point and make work about it, but it might come off as a little clumsy, and I'm trying to capture what is really an enormous topic with, you know, finite time and materials and resources. So instead of talking directly at the thing, I might talk around the thing, using that slingshot metaphor again. So I might talk about two things that are precisely not that thing, is another way of saying that. So, you know, my experience of all of that is not exactly my nut allergy and my experiences with anaphylactic shock, but it's like it. And my experience, especially having been raised in a white family, I'm not really privy in a hard line way to like the history of racialized violence in the United States, but I mean, the lingering threat is always there. It's something I think about. So it's part of that central bit, but it's not exactly the totality of it. So when I hold those two things in unison and do some comparative analysis, trying to, you mentioned apples and oranges earlier, but trying to take two things that appear kind of separate in space and talk about them at the same time and find overlapping moments, I might get something like this, which is a body of work that I came into grad school with and have worked on since a little bit, where I took my like anaphylactic history and I took my kind of ancestral history of racially motivated violence and compared them and found what the commonalities were. So in this instance, I was talking with some folks in the Ebling Library, looking at some images of anaphylaxis cases, and then was diving into some papers about the history of allergies and autoimmune disorders, which are different things, but share a common thread of the body betraying itself in some way. And that theme showed up in the history of like racially motivated violence in the United States, because the body is all of a sudden betraying itself, kind of making itself a target for these acts of violence. And you could say the larger body of humanity is betraying itself by singling people out and attacking them. But when you look at these images, talking sort of a bit about the, like the art of mystery and unknowing, when you look at these images, even if you know the titles, you're not exactly sure if this is somebody who ate the wrong thing, like shellfish or a pine nut or something, or if this is somebody who has suffered at the hands of racially motivated violence. And so again, I'm trying to synthesize these two things to talk about a specific experience, but using two pretty far afield ideas to talk about a pretty abstract idea. So this is more of a direct science collaboration that I worked on. This was during my Kohler Fellowship with a computer scientist named James Weedham. We did not really do a ton with computer science, but we had a shared interest in, again, histories of violence, but also law enforcement and the justice system. And so we built these sawhorse-looking devices that you see over there. And if you were to go up to one of those sawhorses, you would see that big black block, which is a gun-mounted laser that you would typically find on a pistol or a rifle. And that laser is shining through that little oculus where you can see that little strand of human hair is sitting. And if you've ever done this science experiment at home, when you shine a collimated beam of light, like a laser, at an obstacle that is maybe a little bit smaller than the laser beam diameter, you'll get this really interesting thing that happens where the beam sort of splits and goes around the obstacle and creates what is known as a, well, both constructive and deconstructive interference pattern. So what would normally be a dot goes sort of around that hair, overlaps, and then creates that collection of fading dots that more specifically looks like this. And so what we were doing with this exhibition, we had 5 subjects, each one with their own unique hair, their own unique little receiver that we put that hair on, shone the laser through. And it had the hair, and then that dot matrix that's produced when you shine the laser through the hair. But then we also had them fill out these surveys in which they described themselves, did a bit of a self-assessment. And then as the interviewers, we also sprinkled in some of our own stuff in there as well, observations we made about our participants. And what we were trying to do there was like beg the question of like, what is the most legitimate signature of the person for any one of these people? Is it that dot matrix, which is unique to each one of their hairs when this laser beam passes through it in the same way a thumbprint might be? Is it their word that we take as that portrait of them? Or is it the physical hair that's literally in the room, the realest part of them in terms of DNA or whatever you want to say? Is that like the realest bit of the person in the room? Would that be the most evident thing about them? And all of this, again, like the paradigm is frequently that art is used as a tool to illustrate scientific concepts. But generally in my practice, what I try to do is I take established scientific concepts and use them to illustrate artistic points. Partially for equity's sake, but also because I think, like both folks before me have brought up, there is this sort of invisible part of communication that we can tell people facts and hope that they change their mind, but there is also like affect and like a sort of knowing that that is made by a little tiny bit of a person, but if you shine a powerful enough laser through it, you can make it 100 feet tall. There's just something about the experience of something as uncanny and weird as this that, you know, you can write out logically in a paper, or you can just show somebody and leave a really strange impression that hopefully generates new thoughts and new ideas in that person. There's some more examples of that. So this is the last project that I'm working on, last thing I'll talk today, last collaboration with science. This is a boulder that used to be on Observatory Drive, just over there. It was on that spot for about 100,000 years, and then before that, it was brought down from southern Canada by the Laurentide ice sheet, a mile-high glacier that passed through like the Lake Superior region and deposited things like this, erratic matter. This one is 42 tons, and yeah, was brought to this spot about 100,000 years ago. That's a really interesting thing to me because on the one hand, this is just a rock, right? Everybody I've talked to in this project is like, it's just a rock. We'll get to that. But I think it's really remarkable to think of, yeah, 84,000 pounds of something being brought somewhere kind of just because, as far as the rock is concerned, it didn't really want to be here, but there it stands, and there it has been for 100,000 years. And in my mind, of course, as somebody who's thinking a lot about like racialized politics and histories, I couldn't help but think of the Triangle Trade and the Middle Passage of like, yeah, whole people being brought places through like no will of their own, and then they wake up one day and they went from their home continent to this one. And in the same way that those folks got to this continent and people were mad at them, this rock also came here, and one day people decided that they were very mad at it. So if you don't know the history of Chamberlain Rock, this rock, which in this photo is being removed in 2021, this is basically a boulder that was given a nasty nickname in 1925 that it's debatable how much it stuck, but in 2020, 2 coalitions of student groups, as part of a broader list of demands, said that we want this thing gone. So they, over the course of the year, had it removed, and it's now 10 miles away from here, that way. And, oh man, okay, so that is already sort of this, it raises a lot of questions to me about, yeah, just like the role of science and all of that versus like the role of affects, and the fact that this is just a rock, but apparently not to like a lot of concerned people. And so like what amount of distress moves 42 tons 10 miles is part of what I'm thinking here. But a lot of what I'm thinking too is like this was a bureaucratic decision made semi-publicly, but none of us had any say in this matter. So part of what I'm doing now with this current project is using science, using a 3D scanning technology. I found the rock, I've scanned it, I've made these cement casts of it in the hundreds, and I'm planning on disseminating those to people to basically take direct action. If you're really distressed by this rock and want to take this facsimile and destroy it, awesome. If you want to take it back home to southern Canada because you feel bad for the rock, you can do that as well. All of this will be available for pickup in April. I've also like started making tools with the rock, because after all, the actual rock was used kind of as a political tool, and so take it literally, make it into something that people could create or destroy with. And then I'm also in the process of building a life-size replica of the rock to bring back to campus so we can start this conversation all over again. For context, this is about 14 feet wide, 11 feet tall. And at this state, like 10 inches deep, but it gets bigger. And so I'll end with that image. But I got this far at home and I couldn't remember, I couldn't figure out how to close this talk. But I think the point that I am ultimately getting at with my work is that, yeah, art and science, in my mind, are on a continuum that is constantly in flux. Like, there are plenty of artists that are cold, clinical, stereotypically scientific folks. And there are plenty of scientists who are like, some of the biggest what are they called? Bleeding heart type folks I've ever met, right? Like, scientists are married and in relationships. Artists are also sometimes not doing that at all, kind of living as, a clinical type of space. So, I don't know. I'm excited to talk about this. Thank you all for listening, and excited to get started. Great. Sweet.
This one works. All right. Well, all right. Thank you guys so much. These are all great presentations, and I know we are about at time, but I'm going to ask one question, and then if you guys have some questions, we can run around with the mic if it works. It works. So just to keep it short and sweet for me, I'm just going to ask a question for all of you to respond to, and that is, if you can sort of reflect and give us an idea on the role of empathy in understanding and addressing the needs for your audiences. That was the loaded only question I have, I swear.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. That's something I've been thinking a lot these days, especially with my newest project with the Menominee, tribe regarding their basket weaving traditions and how, empathy should definitely be part of the engagement process, because a lot of these creations, a lot of these issues were talked about in a way with a hope to bring in more empathy to the tribe and to the cultural practices that is endangered. So I feel like for science communication, usually, like people mentioned, we care more about the facts, the information itself, but definitely highlight how this is emotionally relevant, especially bring the empathy to the communication efforts is really important.
Yeah, I think that what I've been I think what I was touching on was that for me, this whole idea of sensory observation. So all the our nonverbal kind of way of sensing the world through not just the senses that we know about, but also about how the ways that we integrate those senses in order to perceive kind of other things, affective people and things like that. That to me is like this kind of true unification between the viewer and the object in a lot of ways. And so that idea that with that total non-dual objective view, utilizing everything without a filter, is kind of is what empathy is. When you think about like empathy and compassion, the way it's expressed in a lot of Eastern philosophy, that's what it is. It's the unification of you with whatever is in front of you, like a complete kind of absorption with your subject. So I feel like that is kind of the direction that I've been going in for that very reason. I think that unification actually brings everybody to this similar space where they can then have that experience on a more in this kind of level playing field, whether it's observing scientific information or looking at a political, something that's politically charged or whatever it is in front of you, you're going to see it much more equally if you are able to trust actually our right brain processing as much as our left brain processing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
How important and in what ways do you use empathy to convey or get people to understand your work?
Yeah. I'm a big believer in the value of empathy. Even with this project, I am trying to get you people to empathize with that rock as a means of like developing empathy for other people. If you can do it for that, you can probably do it for somebody you disagree with politically or something. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think the Eastern philosophy bit is something I've been thinking about more and more. As just like things appearing different, but maybe coming from like a singular place. Mm-hmm. The sort of unifying substrate between things. Yeah, I think that's at least how I think of empathy, is like the X in me sees the X in you, whatever that is. Right. So, it's part of why for that also, for the rock project, like why I want to give people the opportunity to act directly with that baby rock is, to like restore a sense of agency to somebody who maybe doesn't have it. I suspect a lot of us don't have it, because what is any of this, right? Like, what is this room made of? I don't know. Yeah, right. I think placelessness is an epidemic, and empathy is a good way to place oneself by placing yourself with other people, like identifying through difference as well as similarity, I guess. I like that. Triangulation, right?
Identifying through difference, yeah.
Decidedly two things that are not you to find out where you are.
Right.
Yeah, finding the common boundaries. Mm-hmm. And sounds like a common theme is almost storytelling in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, all right. Anybody have some questions in the audience? There are two eager women right behind you with a mic. And it looks like, yep, there we go.
Hello, wonderful talk from you all. I would love to just like say a bunch of things, but I do have a specific question for Dr. Nan Li. So I had thought about using kind of like some first I'm really glad to hear that art doesn't detract from the interpretation of science. That's a really great yes, I can keep making artsy things to communicate science. But the idea of trying to communicate about a politicized piece of science like climate change, and my thinking was that approaching this as a narrative first, because all the facts aren't working, so I want to tell a story to try and get this emotional reaction. Does that mean that when we're aware of something that is already intrinsically political, oh, we're trying to communicate on a political topic, or we're sensing that this scientific communication could become very political, should we be maybe thinking about leading with art as a way to allow people to interpret the science without immediately coming to because I'm thinking of your climate mural and the CO2. So yeah, it's does art maybe take the lead in some of these important communications?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, with a lot of the existing issues that have been politicized, it's just hard to change, right? So a lot of these research with climate change, you can see, yes, we can probably make some slightly slight changes using these artistic approaches. But with some of the newer issues, for example, like CRISPR, which is a gene editing technology, this is something that we study more recently with the goal of, perpetuating the public discourses with more artistic and narrative-driven communication. So that way people don't start off, as you said, being very political about this issue in the first place. Because with GMOs and other gene-edited products, a lot of people are already being very concerned about a lot of things like this. But I think for artists and for scientists, thinking about how to revamp the narrative surrounding these topics, maybe how people make connections between the science and nature and other aspects of their life would be a better way to go. So I definitely agree on that.
Nice. Thank you. Sounds like we need a task force of artists and scientists to be ready for the next thing.
Thanks. Yeah, I had a question. I guess I'm not familiar with the story of this rock, so could you fill me in on the details? It sounds very intriguing.
Yeah, so the short of it is, again, this rock brought to where the University of Wisconsin would someday be between 10 and 100,000 years ago. There it sat. And then in 1925, the chancellor of he would become the chancellor of the university, but head of the geology department at the time, saw this little nub of rock sticking out on top of Observatory Hill and said, I bet there's more rock under there, so he took it out. And then later used that rock to basically prove that the Laurentide ice sheet was responsible for all of this erratic soil and stone in Wisconsin, and not oceans that also were here but not responsible for that. But yeah, in 1925, Wisconsin State Journal published an article that used a slur in describing the rock. And that is the only printed use of that particular word for this rock that we know of. And it was largely a non-issue until 2020, where it's peak COVID and George Floyd is killed. And then two student groups came to the university and, again, along with a broader list of demands, said that we would like this rock to be gone because it has this racist heritage. And then after a year deliberation, university, through privately acquired funds, took the rock and moved it to another university property that is not public facing. It's kind of out in the fields 10 miles from here. And so there it sits, is the short of it.
And it's not considered as objectionable being out there?
That's the question, right? Yeah, I think what got me interested in this project at all is when I found out it was 10 miles away, I was like, well, is there a right distance? Would 100 miles somehow be better? And then if it truly is a problem, then isn't it now the other place's problem, right?
Well, isn't the slur the problem?
Right. And so why is all of a sudden this getting projected onto this rock, and then what is the root cause of any of this distress?
Solve it, yeah.
Right.
Any other questions? Oh, we've got one right here.
Oh,
Why are you talking about the rock?
I'm talking about the rock because I think, like, in some ways, the story of that rock is kind of like the story of me in some ways. It's hard to describe, but the way that that rock just got moved one day, and then 100,000 years later, just got moved again. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I get pushed around and moved places that, like, I didn't really ask to get moved, and what's the deal with that is kind of the short answer. Does that make sense?
But why did the hammer have like the word the whole thing on it with the words, even though the whole rock had the big thing? And how is it there?
Oh, it's a replica. That's not the actual one. I can explain it to you later. That's my private guest. I'll explain it to you later.
Private party for Sonya.
Good
Well, I
question.
think it opens up a really honest dialogue too. Is that art and sometimes cultural components to our communities can serve as a form of unique storytelling that can convey some of these scientific aspects when appropriate. They can convey other aspects of our community that we rather do not, we'd rather not see because it could be the toxic or the nasty side of human behavior, and at a certain degree, I mean, does it ever become an issue when art and or science then is misappropriated and used in the inverse?
I mean, I think so. Like, I think that there's definitely danger, and like what you were saying is, should we lead with art when it's a really highly emotional topic? And I think that it could be misappropriated, right, to get people like emotionally involved in something in a way that would maybe, I feel like it would be misappropriated if it was utilized to actually make the subject matter less clear or more polarized in some way, or to bias people in a certain way. But I think that if it's to like I was saying, like a level that that observational kind of field, then I think that's for a good reason, right? Yeah. And it would be to like make sure that all sides are equally heard, no matter how different.
Can I add to that?
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
please do.
Yeah, this subject is one that I'm very cautious of because it's really easy to slip into the realm of like propaganda, right? Where you're taking maybe like even if it is a true thing, using affect and emotion to manipulate people into doing something. I was made like a lot less cautious about that by the images that you showed, because they're so interpretive. Like there's a general thing that I think if you're a person who is like trying to do good, you look at that image and are kind of pulled more in the direction you were already heading, versus, I don't know, covering it in skulls or something like that. Those images of those graphs you showed with like Europe and the ice and everything, like those, left a lot of space for the person to kind of meet you halfway.
For interpretation.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
they're more abstract or even like more real, but not, I think if it feeds an emotion in any way, if it involves like a human expression of anything, whether it's pain or sadness or happiness or anything, that is automatically going to draw people because we are intrinsically empathetic, beings. So that'll pull someone in one direction. But I think if it's like, if it activates the right brain with color or texture or sound or whatever, and it just activates it, just lights it up, like turns it on, but doesn't actually, tell it to go in one direction or the other, I think that is what actually evens us out, because it quiets all of the judgments for a minute. It just like pulls that attention over to like, oh, I could open up the way I'm looking or seeing this thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right. Well, with that, we want to thank you for taking the time to show us what your work and what you're passionate about. And if you guys would like to follow up with them, hopefully you can get their emails. If they were up there, they're gone. But just ask us, send a newsletter or send a reply to our newsletter. We'll get back to you. Just so you guys know that the Crossroads seminar is going to be taking place again on January. It's in my notes, Andrew, I know. 16th. And that will be the start of something unique where we're going to be starting a series. It's going to be 3 Crossroads seminars, January, February, March, all in the microbiome series. So come out and join us starting on January 16th and learn a little bit more about how your gut microbiome is dealing with your addiction, your mindfulness and meditation practices, as well as diseases such as Alzheimer's. So that's all. So if you can all join me in thanking Nan, Sonya, and Casey, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Oh my goodness.